Taswaroop filling in for Palki Sharma. The headlines first. Sudan's warring parties agree to a 24-hour ceasefire from Saturday. That's according to U.S. and Saudi mediators who brokered previous truces. This comes even as Sudan declares UN envoy Volker Perthes persona non grata, accuses him of taking sides in the nearly 2-month-long conflict. South Korea summons China's ambassador. The Chinese diplomat had said Seoul is wrong in betting against Beijing. Envoy Shin Hae-ming made the remark while criticizing South Korea's recent overtures to longtime ally U.S. Seoul warns Beijing against internal interference. Beijing ups the ante to play mediator between Israel and Palestine. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to visit China next week. President Xi is looking to boost ties to West Asia to counter U.S. influence there. Japan amends its immigration law. Authorities can now deport foreign nationals who apply for refugee status multiple times. Earlier, applicants could stay in Japan during the decision process. Now they will be deported after 3 rejections. In 2022, Japan accepted just 202 refugees out of over 12,000 applicants. Crypto exchange Binance suspends US dollar deposits. The move comes after American regulators backed a freeze on assets of Binance. It has also asked its clients to withdraw their dollars by early next week. Binance is the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange. And Australia's national airline Qantas ditches gender-based uniform rules. Male crew members will now be allowed to wear makeup and sport long hair. Female crew members can opt out of heels and choose flat shoes. A new spy game has begun. The Second Cold War is intensifying, and US might have a new problem to deal with. After sending a spy balloon, China could build a spy base in Cuba. Yes, a dedicated facility in America's backyard. Disturbing reports have emerged. They say China and Cuba have struck a deal. Beijing will set up a snooping base on the island. In return, Havana is getting billions of dollars. That's the claim made by an American newspaper. This couldn't have happened at a worse time. The US and China are talking again. After a delay, America's top diplomat is finally getting a chance to travel to China. Blinken could go to Beijing as soon as next week. Will these revelations derail his trip again? Let's discuss. There's no official communication yet. The plans for the moment exist just on paper. But both countries have agreed in principle. Washington has reason to worry. So what is China's plan in Cuba? Now, reports say it wants to set up an eavesdropping station here, about 160 kilometers away from Florida. This is Cuban territory. From here, China can snoop on key military bases inside America. Several important bases are in this region. There's one in Tampa, the U.S. Central Command headquarters. This is the same command which led the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Then there is Fort Liberty in North Carolina, the largest U.S. military base. All these bases will be targets for the Chinese base. What kind of intelligence can it pick up? Signals intelligence. This includes emails, phone calls, and satellite transmission. I know this sounds like an intelligence nightmare, but Washington is trying to play down the story. The Pentagon has dismissed these reports.
Is there a new listening post in Cuba that affects the United States?
Based on the information that we have, that is not accurate, that we are not aware of China and Cuba developing any type of spy station. Separately, I would say that the relationship that those two countries share is something that we continuously monitor.
So the reports are inaccurate, according to Washington. But China is deepening its ties with Cuba. For America, that is a matter of concern. Havana, too, issued a denial. It called the claims unfounded.
These are all fallacies with the perfidious intention of justifying an unprecedented tightening of the embargo, destabilization and aggression against Cuba, and of deceiving the public in the United States and the world.
So what was China's reaction? The Chinese embassy in Washington did not refute the story. They said they don't know anything about this, so they won't be able to comment. Earlier today, Beijing spoke out. They said the U.S. is spreading rumors.
I'm not aware of the situation that you've mentioned. It's well known to everyone that spreading rumors and slander is a common U.S. tactic.
The U.S. is spreading rumors. Slander is a common tactic. A lot of criticism, but no denial. And that says something. Experts say China is trying to turn the tables on the U.S.
For a long time, the U.S. was unilaterally capable of spying on Chinese military exercises, activities. The Chinese could do only so much. And this facility shifts that.
It is a shift indeed. The U.S. conducts routine spying operations. It sends surveillance flights over South China Sea. It deploys military assets in the Pacific. It equips allies with sophisticated intelligence gathering tools. So China is trying to match up. It is making bold moves. In recent years, China's espionage activities have intensified. Washington has accused Beijing of targeting the U.S. government with hackers, recruiting agents, and for monitoring dissenters and critics inside America. A spy base in Cuba seems to be the next step. It is strategically located and near the United States. China and Cuba have close ties. They have been close since the end of the last Cold War. China is Cuba's largest trade partner. Chinese firms are deeply involved in multiple Cuban industries. Beijing also holds a lot of Cuba's foreign debt. A cash infusion by China will be welcome news. The Cuban economy needs it. It is suffering due to inflation and fuel shortages. There's a cash crunch too. But to get the Chinese money, Cuba will have to make compromises. It won't be unprecedented. Just look at the past. Cuba is an old rival of the United States. During the First Cold War, it was a hotbed of all spy games. Cuba had deep ties to the Soviet Union. The Soviets, too, had built a spy base in Cuba. This was in the mid-1960s. Where was this base? The Lourdes Island, just south of Havana. The purpose remained the same. The base was there to snoop on America. But the world witnessed a bigger crisis in 1962. This is when Moscow placed its nukes in Cuba. Yes, the Cuban Missile Crisis, one of the most scary periods in modern history. That time, the US and the Soviet Union came dangerously close to a nuclear confrontation. They managed to pull back from the brink. Now, the US and China are on the same collision course. Washington's relationship with Havana remains frosty. Successive presidents have failed to win over Cuba. There's a trade embargo. Cuba is in desperate need of a partner. The door is wide open for China. Time is running out for the US to change course. So China is creating new problems for the US. But back home, China's economy is losing its golden touch. 2023 was supposed to be the year for recovery. Instead, the Chinese economy has stalled. China's inflation remained close to zero in May. Manufacturing activity has shrunk, exports have reduced. In fact, there was a rebound in the housing market, but that too has subsided. To add insult to injury, foreign investors are now leaving in droves. They are dumping their Chinese investments and pulling out their money. In 2022, there was a massive sell-off. Investors sold $148 billion worth of Chinese bonds. They have lost faith in Chinese businesses too. Last month, $1.71 billion worth of shares were sold. Before that, in April, investors withdrew $659 million from the Chinese markets. They have clearly changed their minds. In the beginning of 2023, investors were bullish about China. Beijing had done away with zero COVID, the policy of mass testing and lockdowns. China's economy was opening up, so the foreign investors did some heavy buying. In the first 5 months of 2023, they invested a little over $25 billion. but the Chinese economy has underperformed. So by extension, the markets are under-delivering. That's the situation today. What about the future? Well, it isn't looking bright. Consider what a former IMF official said. Desmond Luckman says China is headed for a lost decade. Luckman has penned an editorial. He says, and let me quote, "We may be at the end of the period when China, the world's second largest economy, served as the world economy's main growth engine and the main driver of international commodity prices." So Luckman is predicting an end to China's growth story. It is a fair argument to make. There are some compelling reasons. First, the structural problems within Chinese economy. A rapidly aging workforce, weak productivity, worsening inequality, and the crisis within the property sector. There is an oversupply of real estate. More apartments, less buyers. Going by one claim, China has at least 65 million empty homes, enough to house the entire population of France. There are more problems, like the crackdown on Chinese corporates. Xi Jinping is tightening the screws. He's pushing a concept called common prosperity. It is aimed at narrowing the wealth gap. Under this, technology companies, the education sector, and entertainment firms have been hit by regulatory crackdowns. China has also placed limitations on its own companies. Their process to list companies overseas has become stricter. These changes have not gone down well with investors. They feel the Chinese market is unpredictable, so they are hesitant to invest. Geopolitical tensions, too, are making them more apprehensive. Things like U.S. sanctions on exports to China and the growing calls to decouple. There's a big fall in investment from America. Private equity investments have reduced drastically. Last year, they fell by 76%. Basically, investors now feel the Chinese markets are more risky than before. That's an indictment of the Chinese state. And the Communist Party leadership, China's biggest asset this decade was its economic growth. It enabled China's rise on the world stage. But it seems Beijing is losing that advantage. The foreign investors have lost trust in China. And this is a direct result of the policies of the Communist Party. Now let's turn our attention to Saudi Arabia. Reports have come out about the kingdom's de facto ruler, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Reports about MBS and his anger towards the US. You'll remember that last year, US President Joe Biden had gone to Saudi Arabia. He engaged in fist bump diplomacy, tried his best to bring a thaw in the frosty ties with the kingdom. It's because Biden wanted something. He wanted Riyadh to maintain a steady oil output. That did not happen. And Biden vowed there would be consequences to Saudi Arabia's decision. It turns out that statement was not taken well. Reports say MBS threatened to completely change the US-Saudi relationship. He allegedly said he would impose significant economic costs on the US if it retaliated against the oil cuts. The Crown Prince's fury was revealed in leaked US documents. American officials have said they are not aware of the threat. They also added it could have just been a moment of anger, that it did not reflect the big picture. That explanation seems fair. But what the US has done since then seems to suggest that it was aware of the Saudi prince's rage and it took MBS's threat seriously. Let's look at what has happened since Biden vowed to punish Saudi Arabia for slashing oil output. Saudi has said it will cut output again. There have been no consequences imposed by the US. In fact, it seems Washington is doing its best to mend ties. Even though Biden has not visited the kingdom, a lot of his officials have. High-profile ones like National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and CIA Director William J. Burns. The latest top official to visit is US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Blinken met MBS Saudi Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan and a host of leaders from the Gulf nations. They spoke of increased cooperation and improving ties. That doesn't sound like the consequences Biden had promised. Instead, Washington seems to be bringing out the checkbook. Blinken thanked Saudi Arabia for its leadership in dealing with the terror group ISIS. Then he pledged money to a regional stabilization fund.
The United States very much appreciates the leadership of Saudi Arabia, not only in hosting this meeting, but for its contributions, constant contributions, and crucial contributions day in, day out to our mission.
Today, we're announcing a funding goal for the Stabilization Pledge Drive of just over $601 million. And I'm announcing the United States is committing $148.7 million to that fund. This support will meet critical needs that Syrians and Iraqis themselves have identified. Addressing vulnerabilities previously exploited by ISIS.
But it looks like Riyadh wants more than that. Saudi Arabia wants the US to help it set up its domestic nuclear program. Washington has been wary about this. It thinks this risks nuclear proliferation in West Asia. But Riyadh is adamant.
On the issue of nuclear cooperation, it's no secret that we are developing our domestic civilian nuclear program. We would very much prefer to be able to have the US as one of the bidders for that program. There are others that are bidding, and obviously we would like to build our program with the best technology in the world. And that will require a certain agreement to be in place. We have differences of opinion. So we're working on finding a mechanism for us to be able to work together on civilian nuclear technology.
The Saudi foreign minister warned that there are others bidding too, and that may have been a reference to China. Beijing has stepped up its activities in West Asia. It recently brokered a diplomatic deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. President Xi Jinping visited Saudi Arabia for a grand Arab nation summit. It is possible that China is looking to move into America's traditional backyard. And that may be why Washington is rushing to mend ties with Saudi Arabia. We began by telling you how one leaked US document mentioned MBS's anger. A second leaked document spoke of his plans. Riyadh allegedly planned to buy drones, missiles, and mass surveillance systems from Beijing. That would have meant a shift from the decades of security relations with the US, cutting the strongest bond between the two nations, the military ties. Could that have been the tipping point? And could it have made the US realize everything it could lose by angering MBS? It would explain the U-turn in US diplomacy and why, despite Biden's threat of making MBS a pariah, the US seems to be currying favor with the Crown Prince once again. Yesterday, we told you how Donald Trump's legal problems are increasing. Today, we have more news about his mounting legal troubles. The former president has been indicted once again. And this is a federal indictment. What does that mean? It's simple. Donald Trump now faces federal criminal charges, at least 7 of them from obstruction of justice to those under the Espionage Act. That makes Donald Trump the first US president to face federal charges. Talk about him making history, only this time it's for all the wrong reasons. An indictment is different from a conviction. Trump has not been convicted yet, and he's innocent until proven guilty. But what impact will this indictment have on his White House bid? And how are Republicans reacting to this news? Our next report tells you more.
Donald Trump's legal woes aren't going away anytime soon. In fact, they're only getting bigger. Donald Trump is being investigated for a lot of things, from falsifying business records to trying to overturn the 2020 elections. But perhaps the most severe probe is the one Special Prosecutor Jack Smith is running. This relates to classified documents being found at Trump's residence in Florida. And now the former president has been indicted on 7 counts. The charges include obstruction of justice, destruction or falsification of records, conspiracy, and false statements. Seems like the U.S. Justice Department is leaving no stone unturned to ensure Trump gets convicted. Trump is also facing a charge under the Espionage Act. If found guilty and convicted, Trump could face several years in prison. But that's a long shot, so Trump need not be packing his bags yet. Last year, the FBI seized some 11,000 documents from Trump's residence, Mar-a-Lago. About 100 of these documents were termed classified, and some were even labeled top secret. Now, Donald Trump, understandably, is not happy with the news of the indictment. He published a 4-minute video on Truth Social condemning the U.S. Justice Department and Biden administration.
Very sadly, we're a nation in decline, and yet they go after a popular president, a president that got more votes than any sitting president in the history of our country, by far, and did much better the second time in the election than the first. And they go after him on a boxes hoax, just like the Russia hoax and all of the others. This has been going on for 7 years. They can't stop because it's election interference at the highest level. There's never been anything like what's happened. I'm an innocent man. I'm an innocent person.
Republicans have also come out and vehemently condemned Trump's indictment. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said it was unconscionable for a president to indict the leading candidate opposing him. He also said that Republicans in the House of Representatives will hold this brazen weaponization of power accountable. Trump's primary rival, Ron DeSantis, said, "We have for years witnessed an uneven application of the law depending on political affiliation." But with Trump's indictment, the GOP primary could become all about him and the alleged political vendetta that he's a so-called victim of. The indictment, in fact, is expected to give Trump a boost in the polls. It's also predicted to give him a bump in fundraising ahead of the GOP primary. So while his legal troubles are dragging Trump down, his political prospects are on the rise. Trump is leading the pack of contenders within the Republican Party for the next presidential ticket. If things stand as the way they do right now, he will comfortably win the Republican nomination. Almost 50% of Republican primary voters are rallying behind the former president. Ron DeSantis is a distant second with just about 19% of the support. Even if Trump were to be convicted of any of the charges leveled against him, he would still be eligible to run for the White House. And who knows, Trump could very well make a comeback to the White House, his legal troubles notwithstanding. Because you can only discount Trump at your own risk. Just ask the Democrats.
Let's talk about Ukraine's allies, the NATO. As we mentioned yesterday, NATO is in a bind. Yesterday, we told you how NATO was divided over Ukraine's membership. Of course, it isn't the only country to cause rifts in the alliance. There's also Sweden. Stockholm seems desperate to join the security group. The Swedish Prime Minister reportedly made an announcement today. He said Sweden will allow NATO to base troops on its territory even before it formally joins. This seems like a last-ditch attempt to get over the line and join the security alliance. Sweden wants to officially be welcomed during the next NATO summit. That will take place in Lithuania's capital, Vilnius, on July 11. Sweden announced that it wanted to join NATO last year, but its membership has been stalled by Turkey and Hungary. Most of the resistance is from Turkey. Ankara has accused Stockholm of harboring what it calls terrorists. These are Kurdish people who are part of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK. Ankara calls it a terror group and says Sweden is allowing it to thrive. So far, Turkey has vetoed the Nordic nations' membership. Well, it seems Sweden is making desperate moves to secure entry into NATO. And on Wednesday, it agreed to extradite a member of the Kurdistan Workers' Party to Turkey. This is part of the demands made by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Stockholm also enacted a new anti-terror law that targets the PKK. All of this is to appease Erdogan and get his nod to joining NATO. Sweden recently made this appeal to Turkey and Hungary. Listen it.
Everything that we undertook to deliver during the Madrid summit is fulfilled, and it is time for Turkey and Hungary to start the ratification of the Swedish membership to NATO. That is the clear message that I will send, and I have already received, before this meeting, clear signs of the commitment and the support that we feel from several of the NATO member states. And I believe that this will be reinforced during today's meeting as well.
The appeal was echoed by NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. He was in Turkey a few days ago. He was there to convince Erdogan not to veto Sweden's membership.
Sweden has taken significant concrete steps to meet Turkey's concerns. This includes amending the Swedish constitution, ending its arms embargo, and stepping up counterterrorism cooperation, including against the PKK. Important new terrorism legislation has come into force just a few days ago. So Sweden has fulfilled its obligations.
So will this work? Will Erdogan drop his objections in time for the next NATO summit? Or will the problem of Sweden's membership be passed on to the next NATO chief? Because you see, Stoltenberg is up for retirement soon. He will step down as the NATO Secretary General on September 30. If he doesn't resolve the issue soon, Sweden will become his successor's headache. Who will that successor be? There hasn't been any announcement, but there are a number of possibilities. Reports say some NATO members want the next chief to be from Eastern Europe. It's the region closest to Ukraine and most at risk from Russian aggression. The Lithuanian and Estonian prime ministers are reportedly being considered. They also happen to be women, which would give NATO its first female chief. That adds to their chances. Another candidate in the running is Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen. She's reportedly keen on the job and recently met U.S. President Joe Biden in Washington. Another frontrunner is British Defense Secretary Ben Wallace. He's a former soldier and respected across the alliance. Rishi Sunak was in the U.S. to meet Biden. He's expected to have talked up Wallace for the role. Reporters even asked Biden about the possibility. Here's what he said.
Is it time for a British NATO Secretary General?
Maybe. That remains to be seen. We're going to have to get a consensus within NATO to see that happen. They have a candidate who's a very qualified individual, but we're going to have we have a lot of discussion, not between us, but in NATO, to determine what the outcome of that will be.
So Biden says NATO needs to come to a consensus. But his backing is considered crucial, and he has not backed anyone publicly yet. Whatever happens, the next few months are crucial for NATO. The war in Russia and Ukraine's possible membership are tricky issues. And if Sweden has not joined by then, the next NATO chief will likely have their hands full. Choosing a new NATO chief may sound difficult, but this is not the only problem NATO has right now. The alliance has a new headache. Former German fighter pilots who could have shared NATO's tactics with China. Sounds alarming, right? Well, Germany sure is worried. The report first came out in German newspaper Der Spiegel. It says former German fighter pilots are training Chinese forces. Now, it is common for militaries to cooperate. They often share tactical and technical information. In fact, Germany has conducted military training programs with China before. But these are former German pilots. They are there on lucrative contracts. They are not bound by any rules or diktat. While serving in the army is a lifelong commitment, it is not so hard and fast right now. The reason for this is military contracting. Former officers now have a lot of options. They can take their skill sets elsewhere. But is that necessarily a good thing? Not really. There are fears that these pilots could have shared military secrets. Secrets like confidential operational tactics, practiced attack scenarios, and even crucial information about NATO air operations. Now, these are former Luftwaffe pilots. We're talking about Germany's aerial warfare. They learn crucial skills like suppression of enemy air defense and destruction of enemy air defense. Both of these are classic Luftwaffe forte. If they do pass this skill set to China, it could make the PLA a lethal force. It could help Beijing gain air superiority in any fight, especially in a fight against Taiwan. Germany too has the same fear. Now, legally, there's nothing wrong with this. This sort of private work does not violate any laws. But there's a legal grey zone. Retired service members often have retroactive service obligations. This means they must report the work they are doing. The ministry then conducts a security check and the employment can be denied. But Germany wants to stop this practice altogether. The defense minister is calling on China to end it. Last week, Boris Pistorius met his Chinese counterpart. This was at the Shangri-La Dialogue. He asked him to stop this policy immediately. Now, Pistorius says China did not deny the practice of hiring former pilots, but played down the significance. Basically, Beijing doesn't think this is a big deal. And why would they? They are the ones benefiting from this arrangement. Now, this practice is not new. It has been going on for a decade now. It is also not limited to Germany. This is a NATO-wide issue. Last year, there were similar reports from UK. It mentioned 30 former pilots of the British Royal Air Force. They were apparently advising the PLA, teaching them NATO tactics and Western military doctrine. So clearly, Beijing has had a long history of doing this, using Western know-how to help its military. Essentially, what they do is offer lucrative contracts and in return, steal secrets of Western military practices. But why is West or the NATO not alarmed yet? Are they underestimating China's growing military power, or are they consumed with a war at their borders? Either way, NATO needs to wake up to this problem. They need to safeguard their military doctrine. Germany seems to have realized this late. They are now looking at ways to stop this. UK too is mulling tightening its laws, but the alliance needs to act decisively. They must tackle this before it blows up. They must realize that prevention is better than cure. Let's shift focus to the battlefield in Ukraine. Kyiv's much-awaited counteroffensive is underway. Ukraine's soldiers are attacking Russian positions. They are taking the battle to Russia. Ukraine's focus is on the southeast. So what is Zelensky's plan and how will Russia respond? More importantly, who's in a better position to gain the upper hand? Is this the beginning of the end? Or will the offensive only worsen the stalemate? Our next report tries to find the answers.
This is not what you'll expect when you hear the word counteroffensive. Ukraine's soldiers are urging silence. Instead of a loud bang, they prefer stealth. A lot is riding on this counteroffensive. It could define the trajectory of this conflict and determine the future of Ukraine itself. Ukrainian forces have spent 6 months preparing for this. They're armed with Western weapons and training. What are their goals? They want to push the Russian forces back as much as they can. Currently, Russia controls 20% of Ukraine's territory. The aim to win back everything is a long shot, so Ukraine's approach will be more targeted. These bridges could be among the potential targets. The Kerch Strait Bridge and the land bridge through Zaporizhzhia. They're vital for Russia. They enable access to Crimea, and they're used as supply routes for the Russian military. Dealing a blow to Russia here would handicap its forces. Ukraine tried to inflict some damage there, but the Russians say they repelled a major attack.
At 1:30 a.m. today, the enemy attempted to break through our defenses in Zaporizhzhia. The enemy was detected in time by our reconnaissance forces, and a preventive strike was delivered by our artillery and aviation forces and using anti-tank weapons.
Russia isn't defenseless. Its troops remain deeply entrenched in their positions, and additional forces have reinforced Russian front lines. Ukraine wants to liberate these areas, but that's just half of the job. The real test for Ukraine will be if they can hold on to the territory and fend off any Russian attempts to stage a comeback. Ukraine's Western backers will be closely watching this. The coming weeks could determine their next steps. For them, a successful offensive means tangible gains on the battleground. If Kyiv manages to push the Russians back, it might open doors for more military support, and perhaps even an upper hand in future negotiations. Ukraine's main backer remains committed.
On commitments to Ukraine, long-term security to deter future aggression after this war ends is a goal. And we're advancing this goal by providing them the support Ukraine needs now on the battlefield and helping them strengthen their military over the long term. The entire G7.
Biden has got Ukraine's back. But if the counteroffensive fails, even the U.S. may feel the pressure. In that case, Russia would have a clear edge. The conflict will remain frozen, and perhaps Russia would be in a position to push for lasting changes, ones that will redraw Ukraine's borders.
We are in constant communication with our military, the commanders of the Khortytsia and Tavria groups of forces, with all those involved in the most heated combat areas. Donetsk region faces very tough battles.
That'll be unacceptable for Zelensky, who has vowed to retake all the lost territories. Zelensky's prestige is on the line. For more than a year, he has spearheaded Ukraine's defense. This counteroffensive is a rare chance for him to shift the momentum and perhaps influence the outcome of this war. His political future, too, is on the line right now.
Talking about things that are making a comeback, the El Nino is back. The world has officially entered an El Nino phase. But there's nothing to cheer about. In fact, there's a lot to worry about. Let me explain. In Spanish, El Nino means the little boy. South American fishermen first noticed it in the 1600s. It is a natural climate pattern born out of unusually warm waters in the eastern Pacific. There's also the La Nina, which means little girl in Spanish. La Nina is a cold event, the exact opposite of El Nino. El Nino and La Nina keep alternating, typically for months and even years. However, scientists are not sure what kicks off this cycle. So basically, we had 3 years of La Nina, a cooler weather pattern. Now we are going to deal with El Nino, its hotter counterpart. Now the thing about El Nino is that it is a weather pattern. It is not like a storm. It doesn't hit immediately. Global temperatures typically increase during an El Nino episode. So what it fuels is extreme weather. The stronger the El Nino, the stronger the extreme weather impacts. The last time we saw a strong El Nino in full swing was 2016. So it has been a few years now. But 2016 was the hottest year on record. And scientists believe 2024 will be no different. In fact, it could be one for the record books.
2024, I think, is a year that if you're looking for a potential global record in terms of temperatures in El Nino with the continued warming since the 2016 El Nino, could lead to 2024 being one for the record books. But that is, of course, no means a guarantee because weather and the randomness of our atmosphere still plays a part.
So 2024 could become the world's hottest year. Global temperatures are currently hovering at 1.1 degrees Celsius above average. But the El Nino event could push it even higher, closer to the symbolic 1.5 degrees Celsius guardrail. If that happens, climate alarm bells will be ringing hard. Imagine more freak weather.
Most of the warmest years on record that we've seen in the past have happened due to the influence of El Nino because it gives that little bit extra push onto the global temperatures on top of the warming that we're already causing due to human-caused climate change.
Now, the onset of any El Nino event could take time, but once it happens, it will be felt across the globe. Extreme weather will be the new normal. So heavy rainfall in South America, drought in Australia and Asia, drought-like conditions in the Horn of Africa, and tropical cyclones in the Pacific. If we go by past experiences, there will be a huge human and economic cost too. The last strong El Nino in 1998 cost the world $5 trillion. 23,000 people died from storms and floods. Estimates suggest this year's El Nino could lead to losses worth $3 trillion. As for India, New Delhi remains extremely wary. El Nino could disrupt India's monsoons and impact crop prices, thus fueling inflation.
Uncertainties, however, remain on the spatial and temporal distribution of monsoon and the interplay between El Nino and the Indian Ocean dipole. Geopolitical tensions, uncertainties around the monsoon and international commodity prices, especially sugar and rice and also crude oil, and the volatility in global financial markets pose upside risks to inflation.
Agriculture is a key cornerstone of India's $3 trillion economy. Annual monsoon is crucial to its food output, so any impact on India's monsoon could be devastating. Monsoon may have reached the southern state of Kerala a week later, but the meteorological department is not worried yet. They say India will receive normal rainfall. So the El Nino is back for now. It may be called the little boy in Spanish, but it is definitely having a big impact on the world. As the El Nino returns, extreme weather is not far behind, and countries must gear up to deal with it. Yesterday was World Ocean Day, and people celebrated it across the world. But nobody caught our attention as much as Brazil did. What did Brazilians do to celebrate the day? Well, they hugged the ocean. You'd think that's impossible. But where there's a will, there's always a way. And when people come together, just about anything is possible, even hugging something as humongous as the ocean. Tonight, we'll talk about the oceans, why they're so important, and why Brazilians shouldn't be the only ones hugging them, because the oceans are becoming the world's trash can. And the time is to act now.
Want to hug the ocean? Here's how you do it. Stand in one line. Hold hands with the two people standing next to you, and watch a larger phenomenon unfold, as hundreds, even thousands of people join hands together on the shores of the sea, all to hug the ocean. This is how Brazil's Rio Beach looked on Thursday. Brazilians held their hands for a symbolic hug. Volunteers also participated in cleaning drives. You'd think, what's the need for such an event? It's for raising awareness about the need to protect waters and marine life.
I think that we are in a game change for the planet, you know. We need to think better, you know, about our habits, our consumption, you know. We need to think better about ourselves, you know, to take care of the animals, to take care of the nature, you know. We're not alone here. We're not an individual, you know. We are together. We are one, you know. This is the message for the new generation.
So the hug wasn't just an extracurricular activity. For the hundreds of Brazilians that took part, it was part of a campaign to save the oceans. Because the oceans are hurting, and they're an extremely important part of the Earth. Oceans account for 70% of the Earth's surface, and they play a crucial role in the health of the natural ecosystem. Not just for marine life, but for life on Earth as a whole. And yet, billions of pounds of trash and pollutants are dumped into the oceans every year. This despite the fact that oceans are majorly responsible for regulating the Earth's climate. Here's an interesting fact. You thought most of the world's oxygen was produced by trees and dense forests? Wrong. By the Amazon forest, perhaps? Again, wrong. About 50% of the Earth's oxygen comes from the oceans. This year, the main purpose of World Ocean Day was to build ocean literacy and raise awareness about the importance of the oceans. 97% of the planet's surface water is found in the oceans. 97% of the planet's surface water is getting contaminated, so we can't afford to be indifferent to marine pollution. Why? Because, for starters, it's harmful to marine species or aquatic life. Next, excess pollution causes depletion of oxygen within oceans, endangering many aquatic species. To top it all, pollution also leads to an excess of nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus in the oceans. These nutrients promote the growth of algae. They suck up most of the oxygen and prevent sunlight from penetrating the oceans, creating dead zones. As the name suggests, no aquatic life can be found in these zones. So just how polluted are our oceans? Well, there's no exact figure available, but a recent study estimates that the world's oceans are polluted with 171 trillion plastic particles, and the number is only increasing, which is why environmentalists are sounding the alarm. And people are comforting oceans by hugging them, because they are drowning in pollution.
And with that, I bring you Vantage shots, images that tell the story. If the pictures from New York were not apocalyptic enough, smoke from Canadian wildfires have now blanketed the U.S. capital. Washington, D.C. is now choking on smog. Meanwhile, Ukrainians are using boats to cross the streets after the Kakhovka Dam blast caused floods in parts of South Ukraine. And how many ducks are good for luck? Hong Kong says 2. Giant inflatable double ducks set sail in Hong Kong as an artist believes they will bring good luck to the city. And finally, what makes June 9th significant? On this day in 1934, Donald Duck made his first movie appearance. The character featured in Walt Disney's The Wise Little Hen. Donald Duck is Disney's most popular character. With his trademark shirt and bow tie, he even became the most published comic book character in the world, besides superheroes. That's all I have for you today on Vantage, but do catch Flashback tomorrow at 8 p.m. IST. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend. Palki Sharma will be back with Vantage on Monday.
If you follow international news, you must have heard of sanctions. The U.S. sanctions Russia, the U.K. sanctions China. Have you wondered what it's all about? More importantly, have you wondered why they never work? Well, sanctions have a very old and complicated history. Also, there's a reason why they never seem to work. World leaders know it, but they won't tell you. Tune into Flashback and find out. Not buying it.
एक बंदा है मनोज सानी करके और उसकी वाइफ थी वह सरस्वती वैद्य करके सरस्वती वैद्य की उसने हत्या की है और उसने उसका डिस्पोज ऑफ करने के लिए उसका पीसेस करने का ट्राई किया है ऐसा प्राइमरी इन्वेस्टिगेशन में निष्पन्न हुआ है.
From Shraddha Walker to Saraswati Vaidya, both women targeted by their partners then murdered in the most barbaric fashion and butchered to hide the evidence. The big question remains, what explains this mindset? Bureau Report, CNN News 18.
Before we open this up to our guests who will be joining us in a moment, I want to first go across to the chairperson of the National Commission for Women, Rekha Sharma. Thank you very much, ma'am, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. We are seeing this again and again, whether it was Aftab and Shraddha here in Delhi, whether it is this Manoj Sani and Saraswati Vaidya in Mumbai. We are seeing the kind of depravity in behavior, almost like these are not human beings. this is almost like animal-like behavior. Why are we seeing this extreme depravity in crimes against women of late?
I think somehow morally and socially we are going down day by day, especially the thinking of men that they can get away with these kinds of murders, and when the people who have committed these kinds of crimes don't get punished, then also I think they think that they can go scot-free after committing crimes. And somehow I think how we should raise our sons, that we need to think, the families need to think that morally how we should raise our sons and how society can change the way of thinking of our boys, men.
Now, in such kind of relationships where there is an abusive partner, a sociopath or a psychopath, and these women are living for 3, 5, sometimes even 10 years, how could they not know? How could they not figure out that their partner is a psychopath?
Jaka, yes, they do know, but there is a battered wife syndrome also, that women also get used to these kinds of behavior of their partner, and that is the syndrome, and they really need counseling from a psychologist if they are going through it, because they are used to. These men, what they do is, when they misbehave with the woman, the second time they will they will pardon themselves, they will say sorry, and they will again shower them with gifts and love them, and they take them back. Women take them. That is called battered wife syndrome.
A very warm welcome. You're watching Breaking on News 18. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. Let's dive into the segment with our top focus on the state of Karnataka, as the Karnataka textbook row has intensified after Congress MLC BK Hari Prasad made a scathing attack. This against the BJP and RSS. He said the government cannot allow lessons on cowards such as Hedgewar. BK Hari Prasad dared the BJP to prove that Hedgewar was a freedom fighter. He further attacked the BJP and said there is a difference between the BJP's patriotism and the common man's patriotism. This comes after the Congress government decided to review chapters included by the previous BJP government, which had revised the state